Carmen's cleaning ritual began with the master bedroom and bath while Poppy was out running errands. She'd stayed up the night before watching a late-night movie and did not wake until her employer and his driver were long gone. It was Wednesday, wash day. Sheets were stripped from Poppy's king-sized bed and piled together in the hallway. Laundry sorted through by type, then color. Towels, clothes, undershorts, towels taking the longest to dry were washed first. Carmen returned to the master bedroom and from there, Poppy's bathroom. Beneath the sink, she stored a purple plastic caddy with cleaning supplies. Her routine was down to a science. Often she turned on the wave radio on Poppy's dresser. She liked the country western stations, although no one else shared her interest. She scrubbed the toilet, the tub, the sink, mopped the tile floor with an old towel right on her hands and knees. In the bedroom, slightly stale and mildewy smelling, the windows were opened and spring air brought inside. A small Persian runner lay on the floor beside Poppy's bed, where he got in and out each day. Carmen rolled it up and trundled it into the courtyard to beat the living crap out of it, over the fence with an old broom handle. The vacuum was in the hall and she dragged it into the bedroom. Then she dusted the nightstand and dresser, emptied the trash into a bag outside the bedroom door. Next, she cleaned the hall washroom. The sounds of swishing from the washer to her left briefly obscured her music. She wiped down the hallway doors and dusted the picture frames that lined one wall of the hallway, all pictures of Poppy's cherished granddaughters. Her room was next. It was a square room, tiny and sparse. She had a twin-sized bed and a big console television and a couple of TV trays leaning against the wall. The closet was open. There were only a few photographs of her own family in her room, along with a framed portrait of her Lord and Savior upon the nightstand. Some nights she read the Bible in bed, although mostly she drifted asleep to Jay Leno. She never talked about church or Christ with the family she worked for. She knew her place. There was a hat box beside the television, stuffed with decades of wigs, although she only wore them now for the most special of occasions. Carmen stepped away from her bedroom, dragging a step stool from the hall to dust the shelves above the dining room bar. Suddenly, while on her tippy-toes upon the stool, the front door swung open and Rushmore swept in, scaring the bejesus out of her. "God damn!" she cried out, teetering on the chair. "Give a woman some warning." Rushmore grunted in response. He was a large man, wide-shouldered with iron-gray hair, so thick and tightly coiled that it looked like steel wool. He carried an armful of plastic-wrapped shirts, and he smelled vaguely of something fried and sugary. He strolled past her without a word and took the shirts into Poppy's room. She shook her head in irritation and wiped the shelves, top to bottom, moving small ceramics and books aside. She used vinegar to prevent streaks. In the bedroom, Rushmore glanced into the walk-in closet. There was one item of Beatrice's that still hung on the left side, a silver suit jacket with glass buttons. Poppy always claimed that her scent was still on it and would not entertain talk of donating it to the ladies of Hadassah. Rushmore pushed the items on Poppy's side down and fumbled the shirts onto the hanging wooden rod. When he emerged from the bedroom, Carmen was standing in the hallway, blocking him. Her arms were folded over her chest. "Uh-huh," she declared. Rushmore shrugged. "What?" "You sure make yourself comfortable around here." He frowned at her, confused. "No more than you." She followed Rushmore as he strolled toward the kitchen and helped himself to a Tupperware bowl from the refrigerator, half filled with cottage cheese and canned pineapple. He ate 4 or 5 heaping bites, handed Carmen the spoon, and returned the Tupperware to the open fridge. "I'm off to pick him up," he grunted, and started toward the foyer. "Bye," she shooed indignantly, resuming her chores. In the kitchen, she began to pull items from the freezer. Packs of chicken breasts, rigid and pink, paper-lined squares of spinach crusted with ice crystals, cans of lemonade, a zippered bag of cheery red marinara sauce. Nothing was more than 3 months old. Everything was still examined thoroughly, and anything whose appearance seemed sketchy was set aside to be tossed, cleaned out, done away with. Carmen sprinkled baking soda into the emptied freezer and squirted distilled vinegar from a spray bottle to wipe it down. Nothing more effective at doing away with the smells of old food than the mixture of baking soda and vinegar. She used these two items her whole life, to clean, to rid, to sanitize that which was unwanted. Those two, a tough rag cut from the remnants of a bath towel, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. Her mother had been a domestic her whole life, and taught her younger daughter the tools of the trade from the time Carmen Albert was able to stand and hold on to her mother's skirt and watch. Of course, Carmen did not become a housekeeper until well into her middle years. She was a secretary and a bookkeeper before that. She kept Poppy's records for his businesses, and then, after he retired, she became his housekeeper. She was merciless, determined in her household duties. She always spent the most time cleaning the kitchen, for it was where Poppy spent the majority of his free time. He read the paper, he watched the judges, he snacked and noshed all through the day. He called his granddaughters, he wrote to friends, he shredded papers, and he snacked again. Then he'd stroll into the courtyard to feed the birds, water and compost his small vegetable garden, get a little vitamin D, and meander again to the kitchen to graze some more. Today, sesame seeds were scattered across the table from his morning bagel. A scrim of rusty coffee was left at the bottom of a bone china mug. The pill case was still open. A few crumbles of food lay upon his chair. Carmen wiped at each spot, pulling little bits of food and dust and debris into her open hand, rinsing and wringing out the musty rag several times. She remained silent, a mild scowl upon her face. She ignored the piles of paper stacked by the kitchen table, mostly newspapers, a few letters from some of Poppy's old cronies, junk mailers, TV guides. When the kitchen was clean enough to her satisfaction, she vacuumed the living room and mopped the dining room and foyer. She dusted the dining room table and hutch, and wiped the switch plates with a little bleach and water. The last thing, the very last thing, was to dust and straighten the framed portrait of Beatrice Landau Aschner that hung on the eastern wall of the dining room, a painted sentry watching every corner and every one that might enter. Carmen holstered a duster, chamois cloth, and a near-empty bottle of linseed oil, and pulled herself back up the stepladder to Beatrice's portrait. It was painted in the 70s when Beatrice was 55 years old. That was the year before her son died so tragically. Her hair in the portrait was black, curled, and glossy in oil paint. After Solly's death, Beatrice began to age rather rapidly. Carmen had been entrusted with the care of this home and with this family by Bibi herself. She made a promise 10 years before to the sickly and anguished woman before her death that everything would be kept exactly so. Carmen had done her very best to keep that promise. She had worked for Michael Aschner for more than 50 years. She was barely out of her teens when she first made his acquaintance. She was in trouble then, and sought and accepted his help. She knew several of his secrets, and he knew her only one. He was the only person, in fact, she ever told. It was June of 1947. The whole week had been sweltering, muggy, and Carmen felt dreadful as she stomped up Jefferson Avenue. She was 22 and sporting her second black eye since Easter. That damn dirty dog, Willard Kirby, had punched her for a second time. She couldn't go back to Ma's, she knew, and she really couldn't stay over at Cordelia's. She was in a mess and had no place to stay. Kirby had something over on her, and she couldn't shake it nohow. Plus, all her clothes were at his flat. She was dressed in dungarees and a white blouse she'd worn for 5 days now, and the blouse was no longer white. Kirby said he was crazy for her. So, knowing it was more foolish than she dared to admit, she headed down to the uniform and laundry company where her man was working those days. She walked 2 miles with her head as high as she could manage with that yellow and purple eye. She looked neither right nor left as she reached the corner of Jefferson and East Grand. A few people caught a glance at her bruised face and shook their heads in pity and disgust. Kirby worked for Aschner Linen Services, sweeping floors and repairing the washing machines. The closer she got to the shop, however, the worse she felt, and tears kept flooding her eyes. She'd shake her head, shake away those salty tears, but they'd fill right up again. When she arrived at the back alley near the shop bay, she saw Kirby standing out by the trucks. He was smoking. Menthol, dirty grease, sweat, Brielle cream in his springy curls. All those scents of the man she both loved and hated eroded her fortitude, and she began screaming, wailing, begging him, reaching for him, his collar in her fists. Kirby spit his cigarette out and grabbed her by the wrist to hold her back. The business owner stepped outside, dressed in a crisp, short-sleeved shirt and a wide blue tie, smoking a cigar. Hey now, hey now! He stepped between the two, his arms outstretched to separate them. You can't be carrying on like this. He spoke with a vague trace of an accent. Carmen Albert snuffled and choked away her tears, her rage. Kirby was shaking his head at her, mad as hell, his teeth clenched. She'd simmered down, but Kirby was roiling up now. How damn dare that little girl come over to his job and make trouble? His boss expected things to run a certain way, and this was not acceptable. The boss man turned away to one of the drivers who stood in the alleyway, wiping the windows of a panel truck. Suddenly, Kirby punched Carmen right on the jaw. You son of a bitch, the boss yelled, and grabbed Carmen, pivoting her around to face away from the building so that she was out of Kirby's grasp. I don't hold with hitting women, you mumser. Kirby merely spat onto the ground. Who was that little Jew to tell him his personal business? He turned and swaggered into the shop. Carmen was practically breathless, looking down at her own damp feet, her face throbbing. The driver from the panel truck came over, and the boss released the girl to him. Ashner stomped after Kirby into the bay. She could hear him shouting from inside, Get out of my shop, you no-good S.O.B. Get out! And so Kirby got fired, and Carmen knew better than to show up at his place looking for her stuff. He'd kill her if he saw her, she knew. She went to her ma's and promised it was over. However, Ma, who lived in the Brewster housing projects, had a way of climbing up her skin, and after 3 nights, Carmen needed to leave. She stopped over to visit some girlfriends, hoping they'd let her have a room, but she had no money. One friend let her sleep on her couch and gave her a couple meals, but Carmen needed a job. She didn't know where else to go. At first, she merely wanted to say thanks for defending her. Mr. Ashner brought her to his office after Kirby walloped her and sent one of his men out for some ice. He wrapped it in a clean rag from the shop and held it to her jaw and her eye. He did not ask why she put up with it, and he didn't behave as though it were a crime, having a colored girl in his shop. No, he was a businessman first and foremost, and Carmen knew that. Kirby hadn't told her much about the man except that he was part of the organization and usually carried a pistol. You could barely tell that he still had some kind of accent. Clearly, he worked hard to hide it. She told Mr. Ashner that she and Kirby weren't together no more and had no idea where the bastard was. She had finally found a room with a baker's family. They were willing to feed her, but kept asking when she was going to contribute to the rent. She visited the linen service again to wish the boss a happy Rosh Hashanah, when a neighbor told her that it was New Year's for Jewish people. She congratulated him when she heard that his wife had a baby boy that October. Then finally, after weeks of coming by and annoying Poppy with her thank yous, she came out and asked if he would give her a job. What kind of job you want? What you can do? He laughed. I can do anything. I can clean. He shrugged and looked around. This shop is for men. They just gonna make more work for you if you come to clean up. I can wash the trucks. The drivers already do that. I can clean your office and make you coffee. I can add and subtract. I can answer the phone and tell people that you are too busy to talk. He hired her against his better judgment. She came in early each morning and wiped down his desk, his phone, his chair, the windows of his office. She made truly horrible coffee until he finally lied and told her he only liked to drink tea. She answered the phone, and after he acquired the vending company in '53, she would collect the men's receipts. Slowly, she began working more and more of his books. He owned at various times up to 5 different businesses, including a small engine repair shop, 2 gas stations, a commercial cleaning business, the vending company, and the laundry uniform service. During those years, she lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near Cass and Brainerd. She never drove and took the bus to work, although everyone told her how unsafe it was. In fact, she got mugged a couple of times. It wasn't a big deal, she told everyone. Sometimes she got a little ornery and fought back. Other times she simply handed over her cash in resignation. She'd always been frugal, although she did have a penchant for fancy hats and pretty wigs. She went to church for many years with her mother and later her sister's family because she knew that they thought she was enough of a heathen and a fallen woman. She couldn't have her folks thinking she was also unchristian. 14 years after they had known one another, Poppy and Carmen were sitting in his office at the vending company. That afternoon, he received a visit from an associate who brought a bottle of Cuban rum straight from Havana. They were working late, and he asked if she'd have a couple sips of rum with him. He sent a boy out to bring them a bottle of orange juice from the corner market, and they sat in the office while they sipped and talked. The Cuban Missile Crisis was barely weeks away. That night, she told Poppy about her boy. She'd been only 14 when she got pregnant, and her parents made her give her son up. They took her baby from her and gave him to her sister Cordelia. Cordelia, 10 years older, was married to a pastor and had a little 2-year-old boy herself. Poppy had heard her mention Leon, her so-called nephew. She murmured, only slightly tipsy, that she was admonished never to acknowledge his true parentage. She must never tell, and never before had she. Poppy would later meet Leon, who turned 19 that winter. Poppy never told anyone what she confided that autumn day. All throughout their friendship, he remembered, though, and any time he saw Carmen and Leon together, he was reminded of those terrible days when everyone thought Fidel and Nikita were going to blow up the world, and of Carmen's secret. He knew how she longed to claim her son. Carmen's father died a few years before she came to work for Poppy. Her ma died 7 years later, and her sister Cordelia passed about 2 years after she revealed her secret to Poppy. But Carmen had sworn her promise to the grave. By the time she whispered her secret to Poppy, she'd long realized that her work might endanger her son. Leon joined the army the following summer and spent 8 years in the service, mostly in Germany. When he came home in 71, he married Jacqueline, whom he had known since kindergarten. They had 2 children, but not until almost a decade later. Leon and Jacqueline were very hard workers and devoted to their family. Leon worked for a radio station in ad sales and also did a little preaching, and Jacqueline was a legal secretary. Leon's adoptive father passed away in 1965, and Carmen was now his only relative. She continued to honor her family pact long after her elders were gone. Carmen had a few relationships over the years, but often as not with men who were wildly inappropriate. Married men, some. She loved the Lord Jesus, but following some of his rules was a little troublesome. After her mother's death, and then Cordelia's, she stopped going to church regularly. There were a few girlfriends still from the old neighborhood to socialize with over cards. She looked forward to playing euchre on Saturday nights. She hated the taste of beer, but enjoyed a little wine on occasion. She worked and came home each night and kept to herself. There were fires in her neighborhood during the '67 riots, and so she moved near 7 Mile Road. Over the years, Michael Ashner placed his trust in this once troubled black woman. Many of his associates questioned why he'd hired her. They didn't know the lengths that she had gone for this man and his family, and Poppy would surely never enlighten anyone. She burned papers for her boss on multiple occasions. She knew his whereabouts and the whereabouts of his money. She hid things, even taking large amounts of cash to her own apartment some nights to keep Poppy out of trouble. She understood that there was nobody else that he would trust with his home and his granddaughter. She moved in after Beatrice's death, and there she would stay until after Poppy was gone.